Olivia Prescott was born on a crisp day in 1985, the only child of Eleanor and Harrison Prescott. Growing up in the affluent neighborhood of Larchmont, New York, Olivia's childhood was marked by privilege and high expectations. Her father, a prominent corporate lawyer, and her mother, a respected art curator, instilled in her a strong work ethic and a passion for the finer things in life. From an early age, Olivia showed a keen intellect and a flair for the dramatic. She excelled in her studies at the prestigious Chatsworth Academy, where she was known for her sharp wit and magnetic personality. Her teachers often remarked on her ability to command attention, whether she was delivering a speech in debate club or starring in the school's theatrical productions. Despite her apparent confidence, those closest to Olivia sensed an underlying insecurity, a constant need for validation that stemmed from the pressure to live up to her parents' lofty standards. This drive for perfection would follow her into adulthood, shaping her decisions and relationships in ways she could never have anticipated. Upon graduating university, Olivia faced the daunting task of carving out her own path. With her parents' connections and her own impressive resume, she secured a position at a renowned auction house in New York City. It was here, amidst the glittering world of high-end art and wealthy collectors, that Olivia would meet the man who would become her first husband. Woody Fuller swept into Olivia's life like a whirlwind, all charm and sophistication. 7 years her senior, Woody was already making a name for himself in the world of finance, his boyish good looks and quick wit making him a favorite among New York's elite social circles. Their eyes met across a crowded gallery, and from that moment, it seemed as though fate had brought them together. Their courtship was a whirlwind of passion and shared interests. Woody introduced Olivia to the finer points of wine tasting and the thrill of sailing, while she opened his eyes to the nuances of contemporary art and the joys of spontaneous adventure. They complemented each other perfectly, or so it appeared to the outside world. In the spring of 2010, barely a year after they first met, Woody proposed to Olivia during a romantic getaway to the Amalfi Coast. Their wedding, held at the luxurious Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, was the social event of the season. The early years of their marriage were a blur of exotic vacations, glamorous parties, and professional triumphs. Olivia thrived in her role as a gallerist, opening her own space in Chelsea with Woody's encouragement and financial backing. Meanwhile, Woody's career in investment banking soared, his natural charisma and sharp instincts earning him a reputation as a rising star on Wall Street. However, as the initial glow of newlywed bliss began to fade, cracks started to appear in their seemingly perfect union. Woody's work hours grew longer, his absences more frequent. Olivia found herself increasingly alone, pouring her energy into her gallery and the charity committees that filled her social calendar. At first, she dismissed the nagging doubts as normal marital growing pains, but as months turned into years, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing from their relationship. The passion that had once burned so brightly between them dimmed to a flicker, replaced by a polite cordiality that felt more like a business partnership than a marriage. By their 5th anniversary, the Fullers had become masters of maintaining appearances. They still attended events together, smiling for the cameras and exchanging pleasantries with friends and colleagues. But behind closed doors, they led separate lives, each silently questioning the choices that had led them to this point of quiet desperation. The facade of marital bliss finally crumbled in the winter of 2016. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a heated argument that spelled the end, but rather a slow, painful realization that they had grown irreparably apart. When Olivia broached the subject of divorce with trepidation, half expecting Woody to fight for their relationship, she was instead met with a resigned acceptance that spoke volumes about the true state of their union. It seemed that Woody, too, had been contemplating an exit strategy, though neither had found the courage to voice their discontent until that moment. The legal proceedings were surprisingly amicable. Both Olivia and Woody were determined to avoid a public spectacle, agreeing to a generous settlement that left Olivia financially secure and in possession of their Tribeca loft. Friends and family were shocked by the news, having bought into the illusion of the perfect couple. For Olivia, the divorce brought a mix of relief and profound sadness. While she felt liberated from the constraints of a loveless marriage, She also mourned the death of her youthful dreams and expectations. The failure of her marriage felt like a personal defeat, a blemish on her otherwise meticulously curated life. As the ink dried on the divorce papers, Olivia found herself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The life she had so carefully constructed lay in ruins around her, and for the first time in her adult life, she had no clear path forward. Little did she know that this period of upheaval would set the stage for a series of events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. In the aftermath of her divorce, Olivia embarked on a journey of self-discovery and healing. She threw herself into therapy, confronting the deep-seated insecurities and fears that had plagued her throughout her life. Through this process, she began to understand the patterns that had led her into an unfulfilling marriage and vowed to break free from them. Seeking a fresh start, Olivia sold her gallery and took a sabbatical from the art world. She traveled extensively, losing herself in the vibrant markets of Marrakesh, the serene temples of Kyoto, and the rugged beauty of the Scottish Highlands. Each destination peeled away another layer of the persona she had constructed, revealing the authentic Olivia that had long been buried beneath societal expectations and personal doubts. As she approached her 33rd birthday, Olivia found herself in a place of contentment she had never known before. She had cultivated a close-knit circle of friends, rediscovered her love for painting, and even adopted a rescue dog named Fitzgerald. Her life was full, and for the first time, she felt no pressure to conform to anyone else's vision of success or happiness. It was in this state of newfound self-assurance that Olivia attended a gala for her nonprofit. She had no way of knowing that this event would mark the beginning of a new romance, one that would ultimately lead her down a path she could never have foreseen, toward a future fraught with passion, betrayal, and unthinkable tragedy. The annual gala was in full swing, the grand ballroom of the Museum of Art alive with the chatter of New York's philanthropic elite. Olivia, resplendent in a midnight blue gown, was in her element, moving from group to group with ease, championing her cause with passion and charm. It was during a lull in the evening, as she paused by a display of student artwork, that she first laid eyes on Paul Pfizer. Paul stood out in the crowd, his tall, athletic frame lending him an air of distinguished maturity. Unlike many of the attendees, who seemed more interested in being seen than in the art itself, Paul was intently studying a painting, his brow furrowed in concentration. Intrigued, Olivia approached him, curious to hear his thoughts on the piece. What followed was a conversation that flowed effortlessly from art criticism to philosophy, punctuated by moments of laughter and shared observations. Paul, she learned, was a professor of literature with a keen interest in the intersection of visual and written storytelling. As the evening wore on, Olivia found herself increasingly drawn to Paul's quiet confidence and intellectual depth. He lacked the polished veneer of the financial world she had grown accustomed to, instead exuding a genuine warmth and curiosity that she found refreshing. When he asked for her number at the end of the night, Olivia felt a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Their courtship progressed rapidly, fueled by a shared passion for the arts and a deep emotional connection that took both of them by surprise. Paul was unlike anyone Olivia had ever dated, thoughtful, nurturing, and unafraid to show vulnerability. He encouraged her artistic pursuits, often reading poetry aloud as she painted in her studio. Within 6 months, they were practically inseparable. Paul proposed on a crisp autumn evening in Central Park, presenting Olivia with a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Overcome with emotion and certainty, Olivia said yes without hesitation. The whirlwind romance culminated in an intimate winter wedding at the New York Public Library, surrounded by their closest friends and family. As they exchanged vows beneath the ornate ceilings of the Rosemain Reading Room, Olivia felt she had finally found her true partner, someone who understood and appreciated her for who she truly was. Little did she know that this moment of perfect happiness was merely the calm before a storm that would shatter her world and challenge everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and the capacity for betrayal. The first year of Olivia and Paul's marriage was a blissful honeymoon phase. They settled into a spacious brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn, blending their lives and possessions with the excitement of newlyweds. Weekends were spent exploring the city's hidden gems, attending literary events, and hosting intimate dinner parties for their eclectic group of friends. Olivia's nonprofit flourished under her renewed energy and vision, while Paul received a prestigious grant to write a book on the influence of visual arts on 20th century literature. They supported each other's endeavors wholeheartedly, creating a partnership that seemed to embody the ideal of modern marriage. As they settled into a routine, subtle changes began to emerge. Paul, once so attentive and present, started spending more time in his study, citing the pressures of his book deadline. Olivia, while understanding, couldn't shake a creeping sense of déjà vu, memories of Woody surfacing unbidden. She pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the positives. Unlike her first marriage, she and Paul still shared moments of genuine connection, deep conversations over morning coffee, spontaneous walks in Prospect Park, tender moments of physical intimacy. These reassurances kept her doubts at bay, at least for a time. Yet, as their second anniversary approached, Olivia couldn't ignore the growing distance between them. Paul's absences became more frequent, his explanations more vague. He spoke enthusiastically about a new research partner, a fellow professor named Julian, but was oddly reticent about introducing Olivia to his colleague. Determined not to repeat the mistakes of her past, Olivia tried to address her concerns openly. Paul listened attentively, assuring her that nothing was amiss, that he was simply caught up in his work. As winter gave way to spring, Olivia found herself at a crossroads. Should she trust in the strength of their relationship, or listen to the nagging voice of suspicion growing louder in her mind? Little did she know her decision to seek the truth would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to an unthinkable tragedy. The seeds of suspicion, once planted, grew rapidly in the fertile soil of Olivia's mind. She began to notice small inconsistencies in Paul's behavior. Hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when she entered the room, unexplained charges on their joint credit card, the faint scent of an unfamiliar cologne clinging to his clothes. At first, Olivia tried to rationalize these observations. Paul was under immense pressure with his book, she told herself. The strange charges were probably research materials. The cologne, perhaps a sample from a department store. But as the anomalies accumulated, she found it increasingly difficult to silence the voice of doubt. One rainy afternoon, while Paul was supposedly at a faculty meeting, Olivia received a call from his department secretary asking if he was feeling better. Confused, Olivia played along, her heart racing as she realized Paul had lied about his whereabouts. This incident became the catalyst for her decision to investigate further. With a mixture of guilt and determination, Olivia began to delve into Paul's life. She scrutinized his schedule, noting patterns in his absences. She pored over phone records, discovering frequent calls to an unknown number. She even went so far as to follow him one evening, watching from a distance as he met a man in a nondescript sedan, their interaction brief but charged with an intimacy that made her stomach churn. As the evidence mounted, Olivia found herself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness. The parallels to her first marriage were unmistakable, yet this time the pain cut deeper. She had opened herself completely to Paul, believing she had finally found true partnership and understanding. Torn between confronting Paul and gathering more proof, Olivia retreated into herself. She threw herself into her work, using her nonprofit as a shield against the turmoil in her personal life. Friends noticed her withdrawal, the shadows under her eyes, but she deflected their concerns with practiced ease. Little did Olivia know that her world was about to be shattered in a way she could never have imagined, as the truth she thought she knew would prove far more shocking and devastating than she ever anticipated. On a sweltering July afternoon, Olivia's suspicions reached a fever pitch. Paul had claimed to be attending a weekend literature conference in Boston, but a casual conversation with a colleague revealed no such event was taking place. Heart pounding, palms sweating, Olivia made a decision that would alter the course of her life irrevocably. She followed Paul to a discreet boutique hotel in the West Village, her mind racing with possibilities, each more painful than the last. As she watched him enter the lobby, a familiar figure caught her eye, a man with the confident stride and impeccable suit she knew all too well. It was Woody, her ex-husband, following closely behind Paul. Shock gave way to disbelief as Olivia processed the scene before her. Could it be a coincidence, a chance encounter between her current and former husband? But the furtive glances, the subtle touch of hands as they walked, told a different story. With trembling hands, Olivia followed them into the hotel, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Using a combination of charm and a hastily concocted story about a surprise for her husband, Olivia managed to convince a sympathetic desk clerk to reveal the room number. She stood outside room 507, frozen in indecision, the muffled sounds of conversation seeping through the door. Taking a deep breath, Olivia knocked. The voices inside fell silent. Moments later, Paul opened the door, his face draining of color as he registered Olivia's presence. Behind him, Woody sat on the edge of the bed, shirt unbuttoned, a look of panic etched across his features. The scene before her confirmed Olivia's worst fears, and then some. Not only was Paul having an affair, but he was having it with her ex-husband. The two men she had loved and trusted most in the world had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. Time seemed to stand still as the three of them stared at each other, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. Olivia felt as though she were watching the scene unfold from outside her body, her mind struggling to process the reality of what she was witnessing. It was Woody who broke the silence, his voice hoarse as he uttered her name. "Olivia, I can explain." But there was no explanation that could soften the blow of this betrayal. With a strangled cry, Olivia turned and fled, leaving behind the shattered remains of her trust and the two men who had destroyed it. The days following Olivia's discovery were a blur of pain, anger, and confusion. She shut herself away in their brownstone, ignoring the incessant calls and messages from both Paul and Woody. It wasn't until a week later that she finally agreed to meet with Paul, her emotions having coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. They met at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, far from their usual haunts. Paul arrived looking haggard, his usual polished appearance marred by days of obvious distress. Olivia, by contrast, was the picture of composure, her face a mask of controlled calm. Paul launched into an explanation, his words tumbling out in a desperate flood. He spoke of a chance encounter with Woody at a literary event, of a connection he couldn't explain or resist. He swore it had started innocently, just two men bonding over their shared history with Olivia, but had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Olivia listened in stony silence, her mind reeling with the implications of his confession. How long had this been going on? How could they have done this to her? Paul pleaded for understanding, for forgiveness, insisting that his love for Olivia was real despite his transgression. But Olivia was beyond understanding. The double betrayal had shattered something fundamental within her. She demanded to know if Woody had known about their marriage from the beginning, if this had all been some cruel joke at her expense. Paul's hesitation before answering told Olivia everything she needed to know. The realization that both men had entered into this affair with full knowledge of its impact on her was the final straw. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing curious glances from other patrons. "I want a divorce," she stated flatly, her voice devoid of emotion, "and I never want to see or hear from either of you again." With those words, Olivia walked out of the cafe and out of Paul's life, leaving him calling after her, his pleas falling on deaf ears. In the weeks that followed, Olivia's world spiraled into chaos. She threw herself into her work with a frantic energy, using it as a shield against the pain and betrayal that threatened to consume her. Her friends worried, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the brittleness of her smile. But Olivia rebuffed all attempts at comfort or intervention. Paul continued his campaign for reconciliation, alternating between heartfelt apologies and impassioned declarations of love. Woody, too, reached out, seeking to explain his role in the affair. Their persistent efforts only served to fuel Olivia's growing anger and resentment. One rainy evening, as Olivia sat alone in her darkened living room, a bottle of wine her only companion, something inside her snapped. The carefully constructed facade of control crumbled, leaving raw, unbridled emotion in its wake. In a frenzy, she began to destroy the remnants of her life with Paul, shredding photographs, smashing mementos, her anguished cries echoing through the empty house. It was in this state that she discovered the gun, a small .38 revolver, Paul kept locked in his desk for protection. As she held the weapon, feeling its weight and cold metal against her skin, a dangerous calm settled over her. For the first time since the revelation, Olivia felt a sense of power, of control over her situation. The next morning, operating on autopilot, Olivia dressed with meticulous care. She applied her makeup with precision, donned her favorite silk blouse, and slipped the gun into her handbag. She had made a decision, though its full implications had yet to register in her conscious mind. Olivia drove to the familiar address of Woody's penthouse apartment, where she knew both men would be. She had overheard Paul arranging the meeting in one of his many voicemails, a final attempt to sort things out between the three of them. The irony of returning to the home she had once shared with Woody was not lost on her as she rode the elevator to the top floor. Olivia's mind was eerily quiet. Gone were the swirling thoughts of betrayal and pain, replaced by a singular focus on the task at hand. She didn't know exactly what she planned to do, but she knew with certainty that after today, everything would change. The elevator doors opened, and Olivia stepped out, her hand closing around the cold metal in her purse as she approached the apartment door. The luxurious penthouse, once a symbol of Olivia's past life with Woody, now became the stage for a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Olivia entered without knocking, finding Paul and Woody deep in conversation in the living room. Their faces registered shock, then fear, as they took in Olivia's wild-eyed appearance and the gun now gripped tightly in her trembling hand. What happened next was a blur of shouting, pleading, and chaos. Woody attempted to reason with Olivia, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Paul moved toward her, perhaps hoping to disarm her. The first shot rang out, catching Woody in the chest and sending him stumbling backward over an antique coffee table. Paul froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Olivia, don't do this," he pleaded, but Olivia was beyond words, beyond reason. The second and third shots hit Paul in rapid succession, his body crumpling to the floor beside the man he had chosen over her. As the echo of gunshots faded and eerie silence descended upon the room, Olivia stood motionless, the gun still raised, smoke curling from its barrel. The magnitude of what she had done slowly began to penetrate the fog of rage and betrayal that had driven her to this point. She looked down at the bodies of the two men she had once loved, their lifeblood staining the plush white carpet. The gun slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. In the distance, she could hear the wail of approaching sirens, a neighbor no doubt having called the police upon hearing the gunshots. Olivia made no attempt to flee. She sank to her knees, her mind struggling to process the horrific scene before her, as she waited for the authorities to arrive and bring an end to this nightmarish chapter of her life. The police arrived within minutes, bursting into the apartment with weapons drawn. They found Olivia kneeling on the floor, her once immaculate blouse now spattered with blood, her eyes vacant and unfocused. She offered no resistance as they handcuffed her and led her away, responding to their questions with an eerie calmness that unnerved even the most seasoned officers. The crime scene investigators swarmed the apartment, meticulously documenting every detail of the gruesome tableau. Forensic experts collected blood samples, retrieved bullet casings, and photographed the victims' positions. The murder weapon, still lying where Olivia had dropped it, was carefully bagged and tagged as evidence. At the police station, Olivia was processed and placed in an interrogation room. Detective Elaine Samuels, a veteran of the NYPD's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. She observed Olivia through the one-way mirror, noting the suspect's composed demeanor, a stark contrast to the violent act she had just committed. During the initial questioning, Olivia was surprisingly forthcoming. She recounted the events leading up to the shooting with a detachment that bordered on clinical, as if she were describing a movie she had watched rather than actions she had taken. "Yes, I shot them. They betrayed me. They deserved it," she stated matter-of-factly. Detective Samuels probed deeper, trying to understand the motivations behind the crime. As Olivia spoke about discovering the affair between her current and ex-husband, flashes of emotion began to break through her calm exterior. Anger, pain, and a profound sense of betrayal colored her words, providing glimpses into the psychological turmoil that had driven her to murder. As the interrogation progressed, Samuels built a timeline of events, corroborating Olivia's story with evidence collected from the crime scene and witness statements from neighbors and friends. The picture that emerged was one of a woman pushed to the brink by an unthinkable betrayal, her actions born of temporary insanity rather than premeditated malice. By the end of that long night, Olivia Prescott Fisher was formally charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. As she was led to a holding cell, the full weight of her actions finally seemed to hit her, and she began to weep uncontrollably. The arrest of Olivia, once a respected figure in New York's art and philanthropy circles, sent shockwaves through the city. Olivia's defense team, led by a renowned criminal attorney, quickly began building their case. They argued for a plea of not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, citing the extreme emotional distress caused by the discovery of the affair. Psychiatric evaluations were ordered, and experts were brought in to testify about the psychological impact of such a profound betrayal. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They argued that Olivia's actions were premeditated, pointing to her deliberate acquisition of the gun and her journey to confront the victims. They characterized her as a woman scorned, driven by jealousy and a desire for revenge rather than temporary madness. As the trial approached, public opinion was divided. Some saw Olivia as a sympathetic figure, a victim pushed too far by the cruel actions of those she trusted most. Others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer who had taken the law into her own hands. The courtroom became a battleground of conflicting narratives. Character witnesses were called, painting contrasting pictures of Olivia's personality and state of mind. Former colleagues praised her dedication and compassion, while acquaintances of Paul and Woody spoke of a woman prone to jealousy and possessiveness. Throughout the proceedings, Olivia sat quietly at the defense table, her face a mask of composed sorrow. She seemed a far cry from the successful, vivacious woman she had once been. The weight of her actions etched in the lines of her face and the dullness of her once bright eyes. Olivia was found guilty of manslaughter, a lesser charge than the original murder accusations. The judge, taking into account Olivia's previously unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the crime, sentenced her to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. As the verdict was read, Olivia stood stoically, her composure finally cracking as the reality of her future set in. She was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, leaving behind a gallery of stunned spectators and a society grappling with the tragic consequences of betrayal and uncontrolled emotion. In the end, the story of Olivia served as a somber reflection on the complexities of human relationships, the devastating power of betrayal, and the thin line that separates civilized behavior from primal instinct.